So this Friday is the release of Scream 4, the sequel 11 years in the making.
Yeah. I mean, you could say in the making, but I mean, it's sort of
probably
like,
they realized there was some money that they could get if they put out a movie with that title.
I think it was more like the fact that everything else they were doing was not making money, that they're like, hey, how about Scream 4? Let's get that together,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, I've got a script ready to go for that.
And at this point, I just got to say, I'm so happy it's not a remake of Scream. We've said it before, sequels always more interesting than remakes.
The thing that I like about it is that it's the same sort of collective coming back together to make this. I mean, they didn't get a new director, new screenwriter.
Yeah, it's Wes Craven, Kevin Williamson coming back, the
Neve
three
Campbell,
leads. Yeah.
I mean, it's very much the same people. I'm not entirely... We'll talk about Scream 4 in due time, because I'm not entirely sure how this connects to the previous three. But let's start with Scream 1. I mean, Scream 1 was sort of a revelation at the time it came out.
Yeah, the early 90s were, I think, honestly, the worst time ever for horror movies. There was nothing really being released theatrically since, like, the death of slasher movies in the late 80s. You know, there was a couple good ones every now and then. Something like Candyman or In the Mouth of Madness would come out, but they didn't make any money. They were few and far between. Most of the time, it was, like, straight-to-video sequels. And Scream just totally changed all that. It became this big hit, and it didn't just revitalize slashers, which was a very good slasher movie, but just horror in general all of a sudden was everywhere after Scream hit.
I think the thing that for me and probably most people was that it was sort of like a slasher film, but it was also sort of a meta commentary of slasher films. Like, you know, you always have those people who are watching films like, run away, go out the other door. And this was the film where they're like, you know what, in slasher movies, you should go out the other door. Like, they're the ones talking about this while this is all going on. And so it was both a good slasher film and sort of this comedic version of this discussion about, you know, the tropes of horror films at the same time.
Yeah, you could definitely tell it was made by horror fanatics, which Kevin Williamson, the writer, he went from, you know, obscurity to the hottest writer in town just from that one film
and
selling.
then back to obscurity.
But he was really, you know, you could tell he was a horror fan, knew the ins and outs of the genre, and wanted to make just a kick-ass horror movie that was a little smarter than what was coming out at the time. And I know a lot of people give Scream some shit because afterwards every movie started ripping it off. Like, oh, every horror movie has to reference other horror movies and, you know, be all hip and cool and stuff. And it did get annoying. Stuff like Urban Legends, I know you did last summer, stuff like that I could do without. But like, the first Scream, like, honestly, was so good. Like, the script is so smart.
It seems dumb to blame the film that caused everyone else to rip it off, though.
Yeah,
like,
no, exactly.
Like,
but you should honestly do. No,
I believe it. But
like, a lot of horror fans don't like Scream.
It's the same sort of thing as like the Blair Witch Project, though. It's sort of like, oh god, the Blair Witch Project. Everybody's it's sort of like, don't blame the Blair Witch Project for everyone ripping it off. Like, they achieved what they wanted to achieve. There's a reason why it's like ripped off. It's because it did it well.
Like, did it well, yeah.
I mean,
but yeah, I think I'm honestly just such a big fan of Scream. I recently rewatched the trilogy, and the first movie, it's by and far the best, but it's seriously one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I think there are some scenes in it. The first opening sequence with Drew Barrymore is
classic,
one of the best horror scenes I've seen, definitely of modern horror cinema.
I don't know. I mean, you probably could argue that's one of the most signature horror scenes ever. Like, people know that scene so well. I mean, granted, I mean, it might not be the true horror fan's favorite horror scene, but it's so widely known that it's...
And it's honestly really a shocking scene. Like, I was surprised by how brutal the first movie was in rewatching it. I mean, the first two people who die in that opening scene are both gutted and you see their intestines hanging out. Like, that's something you don't see even in the sequels to Scream.
And you talk about Scream being ripped off. Nothing was more ripped off than that opening scene of Scream. Like, that alone, like, what's your favorite scary movie? Like, that, I can't tell you how long that, like,
how many spoofs,
yeah,
you know,
like that's
thing.
like Scary Movie's entire franchise was based around that, like, opening scene, basically. The thing that's amazing is the cast in this film. Like, it must be driven by Wes Craven's notoriety, but like, there's like dozens of famous people in this movie. I mean,
but at the time they weren't really well known at all, except for really as TV people. Probably besides Drew Barrymore, the biggest name in the cast was Courtney Cox, and that was only about the second season of Friends. Or
I mean, David
season.
Arquette. I mean, purely because of family and stuff like that. I mean, he gets around. But you're right. I mean, a lot of people. Neve Campbell. I mean, Party of Five was probably around then.
Yeah, it was around for a couple seasons.
So
but
I mean,
Scream is what made them into who we know them as now.
Yes, but I mean, even even still, like Henry Winkler as the principal. There are just a lot of people who pop up throughout that movie, and it's just sort of like, and this continues through all of them. I mean, there's tons and tons of famous people where it was sort of like people just wanted to be in this project, and they
really reacted well to the script. And one thing that I thought was interesting in watching like the DVD bonus features recently, Drew Barrymore was the first person to sign on, and she actually requested to be the opening victim. Like everyone wanted to make the movie as good as possible. Like when she was signing up, the studio was like, "Oh, you're playing Sydney because you're Drew Barrymore and you're famous," and she's like, "No, I want to play the first person because if you kill me in the opening scene, people are going to think like, what the fuck is this movie doing?"
It's totally taking a note from Hitchcock and Psycho, like that
kill off the most famous person right off the bat,
right? And well, you think that's the main character, like usually I don't like it when a film changes the main character, like, you know, the village. Like I felt like that was kind of jarring, but like Psycho did it in such a way that it set up the plot in motion. You thought it, like the plot of Psycho was gonna be about her like embezzling this money and trying to get away and all that stuff, and then it twists and changes what the plot's about, and that's sort of, it occurs much earlier on in Scream probably than Psycho, but nevertheless, like you don't realize that that's where it's going, is that like this is the prelude to like another story entirely, and it was brilliantly executed. I mean, I don't blame her at all for wanting that role. Yeah,
made just a big impact. And also, you mentioned all of the actors in it, they all give really good performances. Like even people who nowadays I can't really stand, like David Arquette, Matthew Lillard. I would probably be happy if I never watched a Matthew Lillard movie.
I think you're being overly harsh. I think Matthew Lillard got a little bit too much of the sort of like Scream-ish type films
afterwards, and he was always kind of playing the goofy, like,
that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, then you have like Scooby-Doo and all that stuff sort of dragged him down. I think he's not necessarily an untalented guy. I just think he chooses bad
choices. Yeah, exactly.
The one that I think more than anyone really, I mean, you could argue Nev Campbell, but the more than anything who really blew up because of Scream was Jamie Kennedy. I mean,
that's true, and that's also another person who now 2010. I'm not interested in Jamie Kennedy.
Well, it's completely forgotten at this point.
Exactly. And stuff like Malibu's Most Wanted and the Jamie Kennedy Experiment, like who really cared about any of that stuff? But when he came out in Scream, you're right, Randy was like the character. Everyone loved him.
Well, he was the one basically who was the audience on Scream.
Exactly,
he was saying all the tropes of horror films. He was saying like, you shouldn't do this, you're gonna die if you do that.
Don't say I'll be right back. Don't have sex. You know, all that good stuff.
He was the one who was sort of like saying everything every audience member was always saying, and you know, he was the relatable one, and he did it in a funny way.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think he clearly was the one who, I mean, not clear. I guess you could argue Nev Campbell and stuff too, but he really blew up because of the film.
Yeah, he had only been in one film prior to that, which was Romeo and Juliet. So Scream definitely affected his career in a big way. And one thing going into it, like looking back, that I don't think a lot of people might remember is, it's really brutal. There's a lot of like horrific scenes that you might forget about. But for me, the most horrific scene actually of the movie is the unmasking of the killers. Like a great thing that Scream did that had, to my knowledge, like I could be wrong, had never been done before in a slasher movie, is the two killers. Like that was such an amazing revelation. Like you see in every slasher movie, it's like, oh, the guy can be anywhere just because the filmmakers are lazy and they're just gonna have the killer be anywhere. Right. But by having it be two people in cahoots with each other, exactly, it was really ingenious.
But the problem with that though is they then continued that on to the other films, and that really started to become absurd, where they're starting to like take it to who
everyone's all in cahoots with each other for really it's just random people
like,
for no reason.
That's exactly, like they started to really get like people are like way tangentially connected, and you're like the people who were the killers in the first movie,
it really made sense.
It made sense, but like the second movie, one of them kind of made sense, but was a stretch,
and the other one made no sense.
And the other one was just a complete like, we're gonna pull someone out of left field who you're never gonna be able to guess. And the sad thing is they felt compelled to have two killers again, which sort of felt gimmicky in a lot of ways. Like, why can't you just then go to one killer? Why can't you keep it uncertain or whatever? And then by the time there's a third kill or a third movie with yet another like group of killers, it's sort of like, wait a minute, like how messed up is like this family of killers basically? Like there's some serious like issues going on here.
Yeah, but one thing I thought that the first one did in that final scene that the other ones didn't really accomplish was it really you were still scared even when the masks were off. Like, the characters who are the killers in the first one are so disturbing, just how into it they are. Like, they come up with this whole plan where, okay, we're gonna injure ourselves and then we'll be the survivors. And you just see them, they get so excited. They're so pumped up about the fact that they're gonna be stabbing each other and faking this whole thing. Yeah. And then they do it and they realize, like, oh shit, I just got stabbed in the stomach and it hurts. Yeah. Like, you know, well, just so much interesting, like, humanity and character brought even to a psycho killer that you wouldn't usually see in a horror movie.
There's just more tension though too, and you know, she's like escaped and she gets a little like voice box.
Yeah,
and
she starts playing the game with that.
Yeah, but whereas like the second one is sort of like, it's not nearly as dramatic. Like,
I guess at this point we can just start talking about the second one in general. One thing that was so bizarre about the second one is it was rushed. The Scream 2 came out less than a year after the first one.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I talk about the famous people in the first one, like, they just multiplied that in the second one. Like, there's so many Sarah Michelle Gellar, Omar Epps, Heather Graham,
Jada Pinkett, Josh
Jackson, Timothy Oliphant, Laurie Metcalf, Tori Spelling, Luke Wilson. Like, they just were stuffy in. And then the other problem to me that I kind of worry about as they go forward is that there's the commentary of, like, you know, there's a slasher film and then there's the commentary of horror films, and then they have like the movie within a movie. Yeah, and that starts to sort of become gimmicky because they have that in the second one, the third one, and the fourth one.
It really started getting bad in the third one. In the
second third one, it reached like rock bottom.
In the second one, I thought it was okay because at that point it was only the one movie. They only cut away to it a couple times, and you got that really good opening scene. Like, the opening scene in Scream 2 is maybe one of the best scenes in that movie. Not on par with the opening of the first one, but I mean, the whole idea that, like, Jada Pinkett and Omar Epps are watching, you know, Stab, the movie based on the events of the first Scream, and within the theater they are killed and the audience is just like, yeah, they're so excited about the death and carnage, and then she's being murdered and no one even realizes or cares. It's such an interesting comment on horror fandom.
It is good, but then, I mean...
But it's also a little ridiculous.
It sort of took a little while to get warmed up, too, because then you have, like, the Sarah Michelle Gellar part going on.
It was a little kind of like random tangential characters as opposed to the focus on the main group.
Right, and it was just sort of like the cohesiveness of the first one was just sort of like lost in the second one. And you're right, you know, the second one they just sort of cut away to the film. You know, it was funny having Tori Spelling play Neve Campbell,
especially after it was referenced in the first. Right, that's what would happen.
But then like it became a parody and scary movie, and then it came back in like Scream 3, and it's sort of like the entire base of Scream 3 is based around the production of Stab 3, I believe. And it was way too sort of heavily connected to the sort of joke of itself. And I mean,
how do you feel about the second one though, looking back on it? Because I think it's definitely not the first at all, but it's a solid movie.
It's decent. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, are we gonna do spoilers count at this point? It's 14 years old.
I think we can say.
Okay. You know, to have like Laurie Metcalf play the mom who's one of the killers, that felt like a little bit of a pull out of left field.
It was. One thing that I think the reason I'm able to forgive that is because Friday the 13th did the exact same thing, where you had never seen Mrs. Voorhees until she showed up as a killer. So I honestly saw it as an homage to Friday the 13th, that it was the mom getting revenge.
I was okay with it, but it felt like a little bit of pull out of left field. To have Timothy Oliphant be the other one that she found on the internet or something?
I thought that was really cheap, because his character, Mickey, had been in the movie for about 3 scenes. He had disappeared for the last hour, so I mean, obviously he was going to be the killer. That was my thing. Like, if you don't see him and you don't find his dead body, oh, it's because he's the killer.
And then they really worked hard to make you think it was Jerry O'Connell. Like, they really were trying. Like, it's gonna be the boyfriend again. It's gonna be the boyfriend.
Cotton Weary, played by Liev Schreiber. That movie, Scream 2, was kind of run amok with red herrings and scenes that, when you look back on it, really don't make sense except for to make you think that someone's a red herring.
I thought, you know, it was not necessarily awful, like the killing of Jamie Kennedy. Like,
that's true. That's a big thing. A lot of people were upset that Randy was killed. I would say, like, he was my favorite character in the series, but one thing I got to give Scream 2 props, at least to have the balls to kill a main character.
Right, but
how many movies would do that?
Here's the problem, though. Then they brought him back in a third one on a videotape, which he just happened to make about trilogies. And
that's another problem.
Is there going to be a fourth one that's going to?
I really hope not.
A DVD somehow? Is he like Tupac and Biggie? Like, is he like? It felt. It was ballsy to do it, but like,
I think that was a good thing. Scream 2 actually had the conviction to do that. One thing though is it then, you know, kind of held back because David Arquette in the first Scream, you know, he's dead. They even had filmed it so that he was dead, and then at the last minute they realized that they liked the character, and so they put the one shot of him going in the stretcher. Then in Scream 2, he was supposed to die. Like he gets, I don't care how you watch Scream 2, he is dead in Scream 2. But then they have him come out again in the stretcher. That's pushing to the point of ridiculousness.
I mean, you know, that might be like an ongoing joke at that point. That you know, like
they kind of reference that in the commentaries.
I mean, he kind of like, how does this guy keep surviving these events? And you know, it's kind of funny. He's kind of an endearing character. I mean,
you're right.
You know, you talk about Jamie Kennedy blowing up, but like David Arquette did pretty solid.
He brought a lot of heart to that part.
I mean,
but yeah, by the time part 3 rolled around, you not only had, you know, the characters kind of just stopped being interesting, because one problem I thought with the third movie is the leads aren't going to die. They built up this whole thing like Jamie Kennedy made the video, like in trilogies, all bets are off. First off, there aren't horror trilogies. I thought that was bizarre that they were trying to be like, say horror trilogies were a real thing, because they're not. Horror movies have like 20 sequels.
Right.
So they tried to like fashion these rules over something that didn't really exist. I think maybe Kevin Williamson not writing that one had something to do with it. Aaron Kruger wrote Scream 3, who, if you've seen his filmography, not the best as far as that.
But like, you know, like it was all based around this movie Stab.
Yeah, it was all like movie within a movie, which we've seen a million times. Like after Wes Craven's New Nightmare, I don't think any horror movie within a movie is going to do as good as that.
And then the whole like the concept of the killer being some like relative who was really orchestrating all the other killers. And like,
I actually thought that was a good idea. I liked the killer. I liked that it was just one killer in part 3. That was a good switch. Although when you look back on the movie, how could one person have done all that?
No.
So it's a little bit of the cheating that part 1 avoided, but it was different from how the series had progressed. But I actually thought it was interesting that he kind of set it in motion. I thought that made him a more interesting killer than the ones in part 2, at least.
I felt like it was just pulled out of nowhere. I wish there had been some sort of like Easter egg to that existed in the first one that they could have.
Yeah, well, I think the whole thing was the first one they didn't know it was going to be a hit.
Right,
so it was never planned.
Of course. But this, I mean, they could have left it sort of open ended, you know.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like it felt like they're making up characters to somehow connect to these other characters,
make it
to be
seem
killers.
bigger, so it was a big finale.
Exactly,
kind of thing.
and it just like I found it to be even more of a stretch than, like, you know, Laurie Metcalf, the dude has a mother, okay, we realize this, but to like have this like illegitimate like relative that like was real, like, and the thing is, wasn't she related to Nev Campbell? Wasn't he related to Nev Campbell?
Was Nev Campbell's half brother.
Like, see, the whole thing about the first couple ones was like the destruction of like Skeet Ulrich's and Laurie Metcalf's family through this affair, whereas like he was just like this illegitimate son who
but it still had to do with the mom. Pretty much one thing that's interesting in rewatching the series, Sydney's mom being a whore kind of set up the whole thing. Like she you know, but a lot of people would still be alive if she just, you know, kept it zipped up.
No, you're absolutely right. But like all the other stuff was dictated by this other family. It just sort of happens like another dude from the other family just happens to be like the serial killer who happens to find these other serial killers from this other family who are affected by the same. It just feels like you're really having to have a lot of dominoes fall to make this explained.
That is true. That is something interesting about the Scream series that separates it from others that you mentioned. The killers aren't the main focus of the movies. It's the lead characters. In every other series, Jason is what connects them. Freddy is what connects them. And it kind of stretches credibility a little bit in the later Scream sequels, because you're like, how many people in the world are honestly insane? And how many of them know Nev Campbell?
And how many of them are related to these two families in some capacity? At that point, wouldn't you be like, how many other fucking family members does Billy Loomis have? Like, there's got to be like a limitation. I want all of them tracked. I want, like, seriously, it's just absurd.
And so that brings us to Scream 4, which honestly, it seems like, do you really need it? Like, yeah, 3 was the worst of the series at that point, but at least it wrapped up the story. You know, you don't really need a part 4.
But like the third one was at such like a sad sort of low point. I don't think
so. You kind of think like they could do part 4 to redeem themselves. Was maybe the thinking? Yeah.
And I mean, they can't really do worse unless it's like all about like Nev Campbell starring in Stab 5 or something. Like, but the thing that I don't understand is I don't understand who's really like who's this film about? Is it about Sydney? Is it about this other group of characters? And they're just like,
it seems like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, because the way it's being advertised is, oh, not only are your favorite characters back, but it's kicking off a whole new trilogy. Like, so, they say that part 5 and 6 are, you know, planned out at this point.
But I mean, that then sounds like they're going to try and like kill Nev
Are they
going
to kill all the main characters off and then just just go into, then how are you any different than a Jason movie?
No, you're not. But like, I think maybe they're trying to make like Nev Campbell be the Drew Barrymore moment of this film or something, where everyone's like, they'll never kill Drew or Nev Campbell, and then boom, she's killed.
think something they have to do in part 4, they have to kill either Dewey, Gale, or Sydney at this point. Like, well, I mean, even in the third one, they had every trailer had a shot of a knife being flung at David Arquette's face. You're like, oh crap, he's gonna die, and then the butt of the handle hits him, and it was stupid.
I mean, like, Courtney
somebody
Cox
needs to die.
I can't see. I don't think people would care if Courtney Arquette or Cox, whatever her name is.
Yeah, whatever her name is now. I think they got divorced.
Yeah, they did. Or separated. I don't know what is. But like, her character was never really endearing. Like, she had moments, but she was really
by the third one, she really wasn't that interesting. No. I was more interested in Parker Posey playing the acting version of her.
So I mean, but you have people like Kristen Bell, Anna Paquin, and these other people, Hayden Panettiere. I don't know.
And Emma Roberts, I think, is being shown as like the lead. She plays like the niece of Sydney.
Because then you have like Lucy Hale and all these other people. There's just a ton of people in this film. I don't know who's leading this film. Like, and maybe that's their whole game plan at this point. Is just throw you off the scent, so to speak. But it seems hard to imagine it being another trilogy about Nev Campbell being hunted by somebody.
I think it's good. They're gonna have to switch things up. Hopefully they show some guts in getting rid of some of the older characters. I think they've got to do it if they want to keep people sort of respecting the series, because by part 3 I didn't think that anything bad would happen at all to the 3 leads that were still alive. But I think one thing that's going to be weird is the killer in the first one. It was so great because it was so connected to Sydney. You had suspected that it was Billy, but then they threw that out because he couldn't have made the phone call. So you were like, who could it be? In all the other sequels, it was just like this random person who had just been introduced. You didn't really get to know him, and so I'm worried about that in Scream 4. If it's a whole new set of characters who have never met Sydney before, unless they throw out a weird thing where she's a killer, which I mean that would kind of be, I think, pissing on the franchise. Like, you're just going to kind of make your fans mad to suddenly turn the hero into the villain. It's like, how is it as personal and interesting as the killers in the first couple if it's just some other random person, unless, like you said, it's some long lost family member?
And I hope they don't do that. I mean, it's like there was a core event that drove the other ones, the affair you spoke of. What is going to be the event that's driving this new trilogy?
And so hopefully they can pull it off. I'm honestly, like I said, so glad it's not a remake. I like that Kevin Williamson is back writing it, Wes Craven directing it. There has been some behind-the-scenes stuff that is kind of worrisome. Like, I heard that Aaron Kruger was actually brought in to do some rewrites because he did such a bang-up job on Scream 3. And Wes Craven has even, like, on Twitter and some interviews said, like, the movie sort of got taken away from him in the later stage of editing, and the last time that happened was Cursed, and that didn't turn out well.
That's disconcerting. I mean, I don't think, as I said, I think Scream 3 will be the bottom. I think it'll probably be a slight lift up, but I hope it's more than a slight lift up.
I'm really hoping it pulls it off. There are some interesting concepts in it. There have been ghost face masks where they're kind of worn down, sort of like Michael Myers in the Halloween remake, or even a scarecrow ghost face. I've seen figures that look like that, and that's really interesting. Just kind of do something different. I think that's really what needs to happen in Scream 4.
I'm just glad the same team's involved. I mean, hopefully it's not as bad as you speak of, but we'll see.
So let us know what you think of the past Scream movies, what you think about Scream 4, MacGuffinPodcast.com.
Can he do it again, Wes Craven?
Let's hope so, especially after My Soul to Take.
Well, I want my money back. That'll be the sequel to that.
T-1000 can't stop me, I'm on fire tonight. Magneto can't stop me, I'm on fire tonight. Even Zod can't stop me, I'm on fire tonight. It's tight, don't even try to bite the side of style. Mr. Spock can't stop me, I'm on fire tonight. The Wrath of Khan can't stop me, I'm on fire tonight. The Borg can't stop me, I'm on fire tonight. Because I've got space game and it feels alright.